Hi, welcome back to the chicken enclosure. If you live in England, you'll be aware that on the 11th of November 2020, the UK government introduced an avian influenza prevention zone across the whole of England. This video is to show you what we've done so that we meet the requirements in the guidance and so that we can keep free ranging our flock. So come and join us. Hi, my name's Fiona. Avian flu is really deadly to our poultry, and in the UK there's been some cases in commercial flocks and in wild birds. So on the 11th of November 2020, the Department of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs from the UK government issued this guidance. Now, before we get into what we've done to meet the requirements laid out in this document, I'd like to make three important points. The first is that I'm talking about the requirements from the 11th of November. I've got a link to the latest situation in our description, so please do check it out, because it's possible that those requirements have been lifted, it's possible they've been extended or even enhanced. The second point I want to make is that these requirements are legally binding, and the third is that they apply to all poultry. So it's not just livestock like our flock, it also applies to pet poultry. So if you've only got one hen, one duck, one goose, the requirements still apply to you. So please make sure that you make yourself familiar with this document so that you're not caught out by the legal requirements. The government guidelines are split into two schedules. The first schedule applies to everybody, and the second schedule applies to poultry keepers who have more than 500 heads of birds. Now clearly we don't have that, so we're not going to deal with that in this video. If you do have 500 chickens, ducks or geese, or combined over 500 heads, please do follow the link in the description for this video, look at Schedule 2 and work out what you need to do. But for now, we're going to look at Schedule 1, and Schedule 1 is also split into two parts. Part 1, everybody needs to follow. Part 2 is for those people who want to free range their poultry. Now, I have heard of one or two people who have decided to keep their poultry indoors rather than free range them, partly because they're not sure what they need to do, and it does look a bit intimidating when you read the document. But we're going to show you some simple measures to undertake so that you can let your chickens out should you wish to. Schedule 1 in the guidance is a part that all of us as poultry keepers need to adhere to, whether we have one bird or whether we've got 600 birds. And what it asks us to do is take a number of steps that, should we ever be inspected, we can prove that we've taken them. The first one is around taking precautions to avoid the transfer of contamination. And I'm going to read it to you. So, avoid the transfer of virus contamination between premises, including cleansing and disinfection of equipment, vehicles and footwear. So if you walk in and out of your poultry area, you might want to have a different pair of shoes just outside the gate and swap into them to go inside. If you drive a quad bike into a poultry area, you need to disinfect the wheels in the vehicle when you bring it into a non-poultry area after you've been to see your chickens, your geese, your ducks. The guidance actually goes on to give some examples for over 50 birds, which, if you have 50 or more, are actually compulsory. And what it says is, where there are more than 50 poultry or other captive birds, place a foot dip containing DEFRA approved poultry disinfectant at strategic points, including at the entry and exit of all houses or outdoor areas where birds are kept. Footwear must be cleaned using the dips on entry or exit, or alternatively, footwear should be changed when moving between bird and non-bird areas. Now you might be wondering what I'm doing holding this black gravel tray, and that's because this is what we're using as a foot dip, and it's really simple, and you can do the same thing at home. So we've got a gardening gravel tray, and inside a piece of AstroTurf, so it's an abrasive surface for us to just scrub out the base of our boots on. We fill it with water and we add some of these viral disinfectant tablets, and these are on the DEFRA approved list. They're Virkon S tablets, and because they're in a tablet form, they're really easy to store long term. Now, if you can't get hold of these, Jay's Fluid is on the DEFRA approved list too, and that's readily available. So there are options. The next requirement of Part 1 of Schedule 1 that everyone has to adhere to is to do with feed, water and bedding. And let me just read what it says. So it says feed, water and bedding are to be stored to minimise the risk of virus contamination. Now, given avian flu is spread via the faeces of wild birds, we've made sure that wild birds simply cannot access any of our stores. So these are the stores for our immediate food supplies, and they're in bins beside the chicken enclosure. Metal bins may have been better, because I know some people who use plastic bins have found that rodents have gnawed through the bottom. Rodents aren't really a problem for us here at this property, so it's not something we've ever had an issue with. If we ever do, we'll replace them with metal bins. Our long-term food stores are in metal barrels with airtight lids, so certainly no wild birds are going to access those at all. Our bedding stores are not in a Dutch barn or an open-sided barn. They are actually in a locked barn, so no birds are getting in there to defecate on those bedding shavings either. So we are fairly covered in terms of this requirement. In a little while I'm going to show you what we're doing with our feeders and drinkers within the free-ranging enclosure environment, so that if you still want to free-range your birds, you know roughly what you need to be thinking about. The next requirement of Part 1 Schedule 1 is a simple one again. It's to do with effective vermin control, and it requires that we have effective vermin control on any premises where poultry is kept. Now, there is legislation in place in England to say that you can only put out bait boxes and traps for vermin if you know or have evidence that rodents exist in the area. So we do keep in stock a number of traps and bait boxes like this one, so we can act quickly should we ever see that. I would recommend that if you do have just one chicken who is kept outside in a run, for example, that you invest in one of these. Stick it in the garage, put it somewhere where you can just put your hands on it quickly should you ever see any droppings out there, so to keep those vermin numbers down. The next requirement of Part 1 Schedule 1 is about the movement of people and vehicles and equipment to and from the premises where poultry is kept. And it said that it is reduced to only essential movements for looking after their welfare, collecting eggs and feeding. Now, for us, there's only myself and Hugh coming into the poultry areas at the moment, or where any of the poultry equipment is stored. So for this, it's not really a problem. But you might be wondering why I'm holding this black and red book in my hands, and that's because the requirement goes a bit further. The next requirement says that records are kept of all vehicles that enter any part of the premises where poultry are kept, and of all people who come into any direct contact with the poultry. Now, in England, we're in lockdown at the moment, so the only people having direct contact with the poultry are myself and Hugh. And no vehicle is coming into our property at all. Nothing is coming past the gate. No vehicles, no people, so we don't need to record it at this stage. As soon as lockdown is lifted, we will record it in this, our little guide, our little black and red book. It then goes further and requires that records of poultry, captive birds and egg movements must be kept and made available to an inspector or veterinary inspector on demand. And this is where our black and red book has always been used. We use it to record any sales of chickens or of eggs that we make. We don't buy in chickens. We do sometimes buy in hatching eggs, but we never bring in live birds to the premises. And this is where we record where we've bought those eggs from. We record any chickens that we sell. We record what's been hatched on the premises. We record what's been hatched from our own stock on the premises. And we will continue to do that. And we are not selling any chickens at the moment because we're down to our core breeding stock ready for the 2021 breeding season. So until summer next year, no chickens will be leaving the premises at all. So we don't need to record those sales. We will be selling some fertilised eggs, and we will be recording them in this book. Now, the specific requirements of exactly what to be recorded can be found in the guidance by following that link in the description for this video. So please do check it out if you're intending to buy chickens, buy eggs, sell chickens. So please have a look. The last requirement of Part 1, Schedule 1 that we've all got to adhere to is all about maintaining our poultry housing and coops. The problem is that avian influenza is spread through the feces of wild birds. If they land on the top of our coops and poultry housing and then it rains, if there's leaks in that housing, it's possible that the virus gets inside. So the criteria, what we're actually being asked to do is buildings that house the birds are maintained, and any defects that allow water ingress or other contamination to enter the building are rectified without undue delay. What we're doing is every single day I do a poo pick in these coops anyway, and while I'm doing that poo pick I can see if there's any problems in the shavings or the structure of the coops. So I can see if any of the shavings are damp or wet if it's rained and water's got in, so immediately I can make a remedy to make sure it doesn't happen again. Part 2 of Schedule 1 within the guidance is all about what we need to do if we want to continue free ranging our birds. And the very first thing it says is all around fencing. So let me just read you the statement. Outdoor range areas, all outdoor areas where poultry, including game birds and pet birds or other captive birds have access, must be fenced to keep the birds within that range. So we have this, we've got 3-foot high electric poultry fencing all around our free range chicken enclosure. If you don't have electric fencing, have a look at what you do have. Do your areas meet this criteria? If so, we can continue free ranging our birds, providing we actively manage them according to the rest of the criteria. And let me just take you through those. The guidance asks us to actively manage the fenced area where our poultry is being free ranged. And the first thing it wants us to do, and I'll read this to you, the range area is not contaminated with feathers or fecal matter from wild birds, and take all reasonable steps to remove such contamination that may be present. Now, once or twice a day I come through the chicken enclosure and I do a poo pick from the grass, and I use a child's gardening rake and I just hook it underneath the chicken poop, lift it up and pop it in a bucket, and then that goes down to the compost bin. Clearly I need to make sure that I've picked up any type of fecal matter I find, and I also remove any feathers which may be loose in the pen at the same time. But this meets requirement number 1. Another requirement of Part 2 in Schedule 1, so we can free range our birds, is around food and water. And what it says is feed and water are kept indoors and birds are fed indoors or under a covered area which sufficiently discourages the landing of wild birds and thereby prevent contact by wild birds with their feed or water. Let's deal with their feed first. At this time of year we're very lucky because we've got a number of unused coops, and this is one of them. What these would be normally used for is for broody hens to hatch their eggs and to raise their chicks, but clearly we're getting into winter, so our hens are no longer broody. This one is going to house one of our treadle feeders, and I need to clean it out, wash it down, scrub it down, get it sprayed with a viral disinfectant, and then we can stick the treadle feeder inside. The drinkers, we're going to be dealing with those in a different way, and we're actually making something to house those. Let's show you a little bit later, after I clean this coop out, how we make that work. So here we are inside this disused coop. I've cleaned all of the bedding out, scrubbed it down, sprayed it with a disinfectant wash, and now I've added the treadle feeder right to the back of the nest box. And the chickens can still get in, step on the treadle feeder and open the lid and feed, and there's plenty of room for them in there. But for now, I'm going to close the lid up and let them feed. To house the drinkers under cover, we're going to adapt 2 old shelters from the field. As you can see, they're a little bit worse for wear, so not only do they need some adaptations making to keep drinkers under cover, they also need some significant repairs. So let's whiz through that process so you can see the final result. And here's the finished shelter that's been adapted in place, and we've got the drinker way out of the way in this dark enclosed space. The chickens go in this narrow entranceway and come through to the water, and I think I'm just going to tip this up just so you can see the base of the drinker there. It's highly unlikely that any wild bird is going to want to go into such an enclosed space, so it's now safe for our chickens to get at and means that we can continue free ranging, and we've met this requirement of the guidance. Part 2 of Schedule 1 is all about making sure that wild birds aren't attracted to your free ranging enclosure for your poultry, but it goes a step further. And there's an item which says measures are in place to ensure that wild birds are not attracted to areas under control of the keeper in the vicinity of the outdoor area, in particular to watercourses, reservoirs, ponds or other standing water. Now, we don't have standing water, we don't have ponds, but we have undertaken a survey of all of the areas surrounding our poultry enclosure, and that includes our domestic garden where I'm standing at the moment. And we did have a number of bird feeders, and this was the only thing that we could see would specifically attract birds. So we have removed these. All of our seed feeders, peanut feeders, they're all gone. A key requirement in the guidance to keep us free ranging our birds is around proactive measures to prevent wild birds from accessing our free ranging areas. There are some examples that the guidance gives us. Bird scarers. Now, we don't have things like expensive gas guns. If you're a larger operation, you may have that. Another example are CDs hung from trees. We don't have any CDs, so we can't do that either. But the third example it gives are streamers, and that we can sort out. And this is what we've done, and it's a very, very cheap option. This is an old compost sack, which I've shredded all the way up to the seam. I've kept the seam intact, and I've folded it over, and basically I've just nailed it to the top of this post. This post is what we would normally use for feeding treats to the chickens. So we've got some hanging basket brackets off the top, and then we hang cabbages or apples from string for the chickens as a treat. So this now has a completely different purpose, because clearly we can't feed those treats in this way during the prevention zone being in place. If you don't have a post like this is another option, and we are putting these around the perimeter of the electric fence. And this is the compost sack again, shredded, and we've just tied it to the top of a bamboo stake with a little bit of duct tape. And then this, as you can see, very effective, is being put all the way around our electric fence perimeters at various points. And while it is a little bit disconcerting for the chickens, they don't really go that close to the electric fence anyway, so it's not the end of the world, but it does put off wild birds coming into the free ranging area. That's what we've done to meet these requirements, but there are one or two things which we haven't shown you, and that's because they're not relevant to us, or I can't actually show you any examples. The first is that access to open or permanent standing water is restricted by fencing off and netting ponds, standing water or waterlogged land to prevent access by poultry or other captive birds. Now, we don't have any standing water in our chicken enclosure, so that isn't something that I can show you. But if you keep ducks or geese, for example, you may need to think about what you're going to do with their pond water. There's no direct contact with poultry or other captive birds on other neighbouring premises. Now, that's not valid because we are surrounded by fencing, and any neighbouring properties that have got birds are also fenced in. So that's just not going to happen, and I can't actually show you that. The next requirement we haven't covered is ducks and geese should not be kept in the same pen or building as other poultry species. We've only got chickens, so that's all I can show you. I can't show you how we've separated out ducks from the chickens or geese from the chickens because we just don't have any. And we have got any carcasses of wild birds are removed from the outdoor fenced range area. Can't show you that because we don't have any dead birds. That is an incredibly rare occurrence. In all the years we have kept chickens, I think I might have found 2 sparrows in the chicken enclosure. And the final thing that I'm unable to show you is that there's regular cleaning and disinfecting of all concrete walkways, paths and similar surfaces to which poultry or other captive birds and wild birds have access to. Our chicken enclosure is in a field and we don't have any concrete parts within that field, so this isn't something that I can show you either. But if you do have any concrete walkways, do encourage you to get hold of a very good disinfectant, and the government website does have some recommendations, and just scrub them down on a regular basis. There you are, there's some very simple measures we can undertake to keep our chickens safe under the restrictions that were brought in on the 11th of November. It is possible still to free range your poultry with those simple steps. I would encourage you, as I said at the start of this video, to follow that link in the description of this video to get the latest situation, because those restrictions may have been lifted, they may have been extended, or they may have been made much stronger. So do check it out before you follow all of the steps in this video. If you have liked this content, give me a moment and give me a thumbs up below. If you're not already a subscriber, subscribe, come and join us. Hit that subscriber button and the notifications icon and you'll get to know of any new video as soon as they're published. If you've got any questions for us, leave it in the comments section and we'll do our best to get back to you as soon as we possibly can. Thanks for watching and I look forward to seeing you next time.